All right. Just first of all, a shout out to a couple of people who have been volunteers recently and are helping to move things forward. Elin, who is doing a master document, putting together all the videos in one place, so that when you have a master document, you can find what you want much easier. I know it didn't. It's probably been a source of frustration for some, trying to find the right thing at the right time. But this should make your job a lot easier. It's not finished yet. There's a lot of work to do, but in any event, she did start it with a very nice layout and so on. And also I just wanted to thank Justin for his help in restoring old videos that used a different system. And it seems that we might have solved the problem. I know Lynn was trying to do that as well. Justin has some advanced software that makes the job a lot easier, it looks like. So we're going to see if it works for some of the for a lot of the old videos. In any event, I said to you today that I would announce a couple of new interesting initiatives or programs, and I'm going to do that. There was a suggestion, a request actually, for me to teach both Sefer Yetzirah and a work called Otzrot Chaim. I'll explain what that is in a minute, but Sefer Yetzirah is one of the oldest Kabbalistic texts available. It was said to have been composed originally by Abraham, actually, and but then it was passed down, and as all of the Torah was passed down until it was given to Rabbi Akiva, famous sage Rabbi Akiva, 2nd century approximately, second century, wrote it down, and it was called the Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Formation. It is a very interesting Kabbalistic work, and also has quite a lot of practical approaches to certain issues. In other words, what it does is it describes, to a certain extent anyway, it describes, whether it doesn't go into any detail, but it describes some of the practical methods that Kabbalists used to do things that they needed to do. My suggestion to everybody is I'm going to be doing it in Hebrew, reading it in Hebrew, and then translating it and then expounding on it. There is a very good translation with some exposition, some explanation, which is called Sefer Yetzirah by Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan. I'll show you over here. That's the book. I don't know if you can see it backwards, unfortunately. I think that's the way it's appearing on my screen anyway. But it's Sefer Yetzirah, Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan. You can see it down here, Aryeh Kaplan, that's his name, Sefer Yetzirah. He's a translator and commentary. And it's worth, if you're interested in it anyway, it may be worth getting. I don't even know if it's available anymore, if it's still in print, but it may be. I would imagine that they might have printed it again by this time. So, but we will not be using it exclusively, just maybe some of the translation, so you can do some preparation. Okay, there's that. And then there is the Otzrot Chaim. Otzrot Chaim is actually one of the primary works of the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzhak Luria, the famous Kabbalist from the 1500s, the father of modern Kabbalah, you could say. And his most famous work is called Eitz Chaim, but Eitz Chaim was really a compilation of many works that were written really by his disciple. His disciple was known as Chaim Vital. So Chaim Vital wrote, is the correct view? Great. So Chaim Vital wrote a book called, he wrote many works, and one of them that was put together in a later generation by someone named Meir Poppers was called Eitz Chaim, which is the most popular of the writings of the Arizal. It's most comprehensive, but the most well-ordered, the most organized, and the least repetitious, perhaps, And best written one is actually Otrot Chaim. Otrot Chaim is the sort of the latest version, you could say, of Eitz Chaim, and it is in Eitz Chaim they bring earlier versions, later versions, later and later versions. It's a mess to a certain extent. It was done like that so that nothing would be left out, but makes it much harder to learn. So Otrot Chaim. Now the Otrot Chaim that we're going to do, I'm not going to go through the Hebrew text, which is lengthy and difficult, but I will take a chapter. I will go through it sort of a chapter or a sub-chapter at a time, and just expound on it, the main idea in English, and that should go on for quite a few lectures. Now, one of our good friends also suggested that I make both of these available for subscription only, and my answer was I don't restrict study from anybody. And then the suggestion was, well, why don't you make it a voluntary subscription, which I'm willing to do. Obviously, that would be a big help. Again, there's no subscription requirement for anybody to enter into the classes. I'm not sure which day I'm going to be doing Sefer Yetzirah or Otzrot Chaim. The Otzrot Chaim might just be recorded, and I'm not sure that I'll do it live. But Sefer Yetzirah maybe Wednesday night, or might try and think of some other time. But Wednesday night looks like the night that's available right now. Shelley says she has a book and a PDF as well. So if anyone is interested, maybe Shirley could share the PDF. I don't know if you paid for the PDF. If you paid for the PDF, then I suppose you shouldn't share it. That wouldn't be honest. But if you have the PDF as sort of open source, then anyone can ask Shirley. Shirley, would you mind sharing an email that people can reach you at? Or maybe you don't want to do that. You can write to me and I will forward it if that's, but it's up to you, whatever you want. Oh, there you go. lucidshell@gmail.com. There you go. Okay, so you'll be able to get a copy of the book. I'm not sure the PDF of the book. I'm not sure if it's the Aria Kaplan version, but in any event, you'll get some idea what's going on. All right. Now, yes, it is. Oh, okay. Very good. All right, here now is, if anyone wants to make us a subscription, here is the link. It's a PayPal thing, and it's for Rabbanut NFP, that's what it's called. So again, there's no obligation of any sort for a subscription. It would just certainly help as far as I'm concerned, but Torah is meant to be taught like Moses taught it, like Moshe Rabbeinu taught it, free and open for everybody. It's not meant to be that you have to pay for it. Of course, there are schools and things like that, and we don't discount what it is that they're doing. They do have expenses and so on. Anyway, whatever. Let's leave that subject. It's not necessary to talk about it too much. We come to this week's Torah reading. This week's Torah reading is called Chukas or Chukat. And it talks about the beginning. Talks about the beginning of the section. Talks about the red heifer, the paraduma, the red heifer. I'm not going to talk about that section. I'm going to talk about the passing of Miriam, Moses' sister, Moses and Aaron's sister, and what happened subsequently. And this is the story of between a rock and a hard place, as I mentioned. This is the story when Moses hit the rock when he shouldn't have hit it. He should have spoken to it, and so on. I just want to read you some of the text of the story, so that we get some, a reasonable idea of what actually is going on. So Miriam passes away, and the community does not have any water. Why do they not have any water? Because the well that traveled with them in the desert in a miraculous way, there was a well that traveled with them, that was in the merit of Miriam. There was the clouds of glory. That was the merit of Aaron. There was the manna. That is the merit of Moses. And then there was the well of Miriam, which was in her merit. After each of these, after Miriam passed away, it was restored by Moses. In other words, in his merit as well, as we'll see. And when Aaron passed away, also the Ananei Kavod, the clouds of glory, were also restored by Moses. Okay, so that's the story, that Miriam passes away. So then there's no water, and the people are as usual complaining about water. They need water. And, they go to the extremes, as is often the case, unfortunately. They ask, why did you take us out of Egypt and bring us to this terrible place, the desert? It's an area, they've been there for 40 years already. It's an area where there are no plants, figs, grapes, pomegranates. Now there's not even any water to drink. So Moses and Aaron are pretty worried about this, and they go to the tent of meeting, and there they consult with God. So God spoke to Moses and saying as follows: take your staff. It says take this staff. Now, interestingly enough, in the Zohar and in various other places in Kabbalah, it is brought that the staff that he took was actually Jacob's staff. With Jacob's staff as well, not his own staff. We'll maybe speak about that a little bit later. But in any event, take the staff, God says to him, and you and Aaron assemble the community. Speak to the rock. Now, what kind of rock was this? This wasn't the rock that traveled with them. Speak to a rock was Aria Kaplan translates it a cliff. In other words, basically a rock that was embedded. It wasn't a movable rock. It was a rock that was bedrock. Speak to the bedrock, basically, right? The rock that was sort of buried in the earth and couldn't be moved from there. A huge slab of rock. So speak to the rock, to the cliff in their presence, and it will give forth its water. You will thus bring water from the rock, the cliff, and allow the community and their livestock to drink. What happens? Moses takes the staff, and as he had been instructed, and he goes in front of the community and he begins talking to them, and he says, listen now, you rebels. Now, this was not exactly the best way to start things, as we'll find out, but that's what he said. Listen now, you rebels, shouted Moses, shall we produce water for you from this rock? Is that what you're expecting us to do? And then he raised his hand and he struck the rock twice with his staff. A large amount of water gushed out, and the community and their animals were able to drink. Okay, so what's going on over here? That's the basic story. What was the problem? It was because of this issue that Moses was not allowed to go, Moshe was not allowed to go into the land of Israel eventually. When they were on the border of the land of Israel, were about to go in, and this incident happened, and Moses was actually buried on Mount Nebo. Aaron and Miriam were also buried in the desert, and they never got into the Holy Land, unfortunately. But the idea is as follows: what did Moses do wrong? And did it warrant him not being allowed to go into the land of Israel? So what he did was as follows. Basically, he was told to speak to the rock. His error was that when God told him, take the staff with you, he was under the impression that he should do with the staff what he had done previously in the section called Beshalach. The section that talks about the splitting of the sea, there was a similar incident over there where they did not have water, and God tells Moses, take your staff and strike the rock, and water will come out, and so it was. So that was the first time that they had water from this rock, but the continuation of the water was in the merit of Miriam. The merit of Miriam, Moses' sister, Moshe's sister. So the problem was that, according to many, was that Moses struck the rock instead of speaking to it. Others say that the beginning of his speech was the problem. Shimon Hamoirim, he said, listen here, you rebels, you insurrectionists. A good word for a modern context. Listen here, and he spoke to them in an improper way. Now, these are just the surface kind of ways of looking at it. That Moses did the wrong thing. We have to understand what it was that he actually did wrong over here. What was the error? What was his mistake, and how can we learn from it and avoid it ourselves? So there's very interesting analysis that is done of this in various Kabbalistic works, beginning with the Arizal. And the Arizal explains it in a very, very technical way. I'm going to not explain it in that technical way because I'll get to that, Shirley. I'll get to that soon. I don't want to explain it in the technical way because everyone's going to get lost, basically. Let me explain, first of all, what the Arizal, more or less what the Arizal says. The idea is that there's a difference between a tzur, which was the first rock, the rock that he was told to strike at the splitting of the sea, at that in that parsha, in that section Bashalach. And then there's what's called the Sela. Sela, S-E-L-A, I suppose you would say in English, you would spell it, which also means a rock, as I explained, a cliff, an embedded rock. So there's a difference between these two things. There's a difference between a tzur and a sela. What's the difference? So the Arizal basically explains as follows. Arizal with various other explanations on top of it. Basically, the idea of a tzur, whenever you say the word tzur in Hebrew, what you mean is essentially something like a flintstone, right? In other words, it's something that if you hit the rock, if you hit metal on the rock, a spark will come out, right? Flintstone. You probably have, in a modern day and age, you probably heard of these things. Once upon a time there was Flintstone, and that's how they used to make fire. They had some rags or whatever it was, and then they hit a flintstone with a piece of metal usually, and that's how they got a spark out, and eventually it was able to light these very dry rags and so on, and that's how they made fire. Okay. One of the ideas here is that we're not looking so much at the concept of fire coming out, but the concept of fire inside the rock. Where is that fire inside the rock? Now, obviously, if you break the rock apart, you're not going to find any fire. It has the potential for fire. In other words, it has the potential to bring out a spark. It has the potential to bring out that electric spark that's within it. That's what a sur is all about. And initially, when the Jewish people came out of Egypt as slaves, they were enslaved in Egypt. They had a slave mentality. They had a mentality such that in order to get anything out of them, in order to bring out any kind of spark from within them, that had to be done using force. That had to be done by, so to speak, hitting them. Now, obviously, Moses didn't hit them personally, but the modus operandi, you could say, the way things were approached was that they had to be done with gevura, with what is called harsh rhetoric, harsh words, harsh judgments. And that's why he was told, strike the rock, because there's no other way to get what comes out from within. There's no way to get out that electric pulse, that fire within, without hitting the rock. That's the only way to do it. And so it was that throughout the early years in the desert, that was kind of the modus operandi. That was the way things played out. There was a certain amount of harshness. Yeah. You used flint to make fire in the Boy Scouts. Yeah, sure. That's a long time ago. How does it relate to Zivug, and were other worlds involved? We'll get to the concept of Zivug later on. We'll get there. Were the other worlds involved? Yes, I'm going to speak about what the other worlds were. Now, what is this hidden spark in Kabbalistic terminology? What is this hidden spark that's inside the rock? Well, it is called in technical terminology, it's called the Eser Sfirot HaGenuzot, the 10 hidden Sfirot. The 10 hidden Sfirot are the highest level of the Sfirot. As we all know, there are various worlds, there are various planes of reality. The lowest plane of reality, Asiya, the next plane up is called Yetzira, and then above that is the world of Bria, and then there's the plane of reality called Atzilut, and beyond that is Adam Kadmon, and beyond that is the Or Ein Sof, the infinite revelation of godliness, the infinite revelation of godliness that cannot be called a world. It is the infinite light, the infinite revelation of godliness. Now, the Eser Sfirot HaGenuzot, those hidden Sfirot are hidden, according to most opinions, are hidden in the Or Ein Sof prior to the Tzimtzum. The Tzimtzum, the constriction of the light, and so on. One of the main works that discusses this is a work called Basharshi Dimu. It's a series of very deep essays or Hasidic discourses given by someone who was named Rabbi Shalom Dovber Lubavitch. In the year was Tafresh Ayin Beis, so it's usually called Ayin Beis, and the series called Ayin Beis. It's essays and discourses that he gave over the period of a number of years, but starting off in the year Ayin Beis. Anyway, he explains over there that the Eser Sfirot HaGenuzot were the Sfirot in the Or Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum. And in order to get them out of there, in order for them to come to be revealed down below, so certain actions had to be taken. Those actions were usually the action of what is called tzimtzum. In other words, the idea of constriction and narrowing things down and making a kli, making something ready, making a vessel to be able to contain those sparks of light. That was what the striking of the rock was doing, and the effect that it had not only on the rock, but on the people who were watching. Right? The people who were watching were also affected by the striking of the rock. They understood, whether they understood it intellectually or not is another question, but they certainly understood emotionally and perhaps subconsciously that in order to get out their best selves, there had to be that harsh action, that tzimtzum, that constriction that brought forth their capabilities. As you probably know, that some of the top athletes in the world, in order for them to be able to produce what they do, to achieve what they do, it's a pretty tough regimen. Their trainers are tough on them. Their trainers maybe more than tough in many cases, maybe even abusive. But be that as it may, in order to get out the best from them, they really push them hard, very hard. And that's the concept of the tzur, right? To Ayin Beis, yeah. That is the correct. Well, in English, Ayin Beis, that would be the way to spell it. If you want, well, I have another channel on YouTube. The usual channel is called Kabbalah Decoded, and that one is called Hasidus Decoded. I'll just write it in. If you want to have a look, there's a few lectures over there. The problem is that they are on a very high level. So it's another YouTube channel. You could look for it if you're interested. Did that go through to everybody, or did it just go through? Yeah, the advanced level. Yeah, it's definitely the book itself is an advanced book, and it's meant to be given over to people who already know how to learn these things themselves. They just need some more expansion of the ideas. Anyway, Hasidus Decoded is what it's called. Now, let me just see. Oh, I see what happened here. Everyone in the meeting. Okay, yeah. So Hasidus Decoded. There you go. Okay, Hasidus Decoded. Okay, so there are other opinions that explain that the Eser Sfirot HaGenuzot are not in the Or Ein Sof. Before the Tzimtzum, there's an aspect of the Esesiris HaGnuzot in Keter. In Keter, in other words, you have all of the Sfirot going from Malchut all the way up to Bina, and then Chochma, and then Keter. So the Esesiris Sfirot HaGnuzot, according to the second opinion, is that they're in Keter. Okay, be that as it may, they still have to be brought out of Keter, and by using the same means. It has to be brought out through Gvura, through Din, through using force. They have to be kind of forced out. Now, when we say forced out, we don't mean forced out against God's will. That would be completely inappropriate. The idea is that we have to work for it. We have to do something in order for it to happen. You know, one of the failings, one of the great failings of the people who, the Israelites in the desert, one of the great failings was that they just expected everything to come, you know, manna from heaven, without really doing any work for it. And that was their biggest failing, and that's why they in fact had to die off in the desert, because once they got to the land, to the Holy Land, once they got to the land of Israel, they would have to work, they would have to plow and sow and reap and so on and so forth. It was hard work that was expected. And you only got according to what you gave. In other words, if you only, let's say, plowed 1 acre, well, there was only 1 acre that was going to grow. You know, if you plowed and planted and reaped, so on, that's all you're going to get. So it's according to the land of Israel works according to the amount of effort you put in is the amount of effort you get out. Of course, there's blessing, and therefore it is much more that you get out than actually what you put in. But the general rule is you have to put in order to get out. That's the general rule, right? And that is certainly it's a message in life for all of us. You have to yes, the suffering does not justify relaxing when there's still much work to do. I think it's a victim mentality. Exactly. Unfortunately, people tend to rely on the victim mentality. In other words, I'm a victim, and therefore you have to now, you know, you have to support me, and you have to give me, and you have to this and then the other. And it's definitely not the way to go. Interestingly enough, people who were really victims, Holocaust survivors. 99% of Holocaust survivors, all the ones that I know anyway, so I'm assuming that there may be some that didn't, but all Holocaust survivors that I know, and my father-in-law was a Holocaust survivor, my wife's father, who passed away about 12 years ago, no, 13 years ago, was he was a person who was in several camps, including Auschwitz, and he survived them. He came out as a rather underweight, 85 pound, 23, 24-year-old. That's how much he weighed, 85 pounds, completely emaciated, but he survived. And as I was saying, all of the Holocaust people and survivors that I know all went to work with a passion. They went to work and they worked very hard, and they built up families, and some of them became very wealthy and are very generous with their money and so on and so forth. But in other words, I understood that being a victim is not going to get me very far. You have to do something. Okay. Let's not dwell on that too much, because I'm not sure what your question why was, Rafi. Why what? If you could just repeat the question. I know we're speaking about something. I'm not sure what it was though. There's something, yeah, okay. Not cannot rest, but it cannot be permanent state if the desire, yeah, the light to descend, yes. Opening besides the eye of a needle, exactly. That's the point. That's exactly the point, Rafi. You open for me the eye of a needle, and I will open for you, like it says, like the doors of in the not in the tabernacle, in the temple, the doors of the hall, the doors of the hallway. Now, the doors of the hallway that they're talking about were such that there were no doors. I'll open you like the doors of the hallway. There were no doors over there. And the sort of the entrance hall over there, it was an open, so that's what it means, completely open. That's the idea. Victim mentality also stops a person's thinking process almost completely, right? Because they're looking to receive rather than give. The best way of receiving is to give. Not that that should be the purpose of giving, but that should definitely be, we should be aware of that, to give is to receive. I think so. What was that, Shakespeare? All right. They understood the value of life. Oh, they sure did. Yeah, they sure did. This may be really far out. Is water the element related to suffering and sadness, and that's why it's hard to spark fire in that state? No, actually, water is not a state. It's the opposite. Water is the concept of joy. It's the concept of purity and joy. That's why you'll see when they crossed the sea, so they sang a song. That was the first song in the Torah. And when the well was reestablished by Moshe, by Moses, this well of Miriam, they also sang a song. It's called Ali Be'er. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Okay, so Rafi, okay. I see. All right. Okay. Yeah. Tov. Okay, so let's continue now. That is all the concept that we've spoken about, was the concept of tzur, right? The concept of tzur, the original rock that had to be hit. However, there's another concept which is called sela. Sela also means a rock, an embedded rock essentially. But the difference between a sela and a tzur is the difference between the beginning of their journey in the desert and the end of the journey in the desert. By this time, throughout all of the 40 years that they'd been wandering through the desert with Moses and with Miriam and with Aaron, they had developed a certain level of spiritual awareness, spiritual sensitivity, spiritual openness, such that when Moshe called them rebellious, and then he hit the rock, which was to them as if they were being beaten over the head, this did not find favor in God's eyes. Why? Because at this point in time, it was sufficient to speak to them to bring out their waters. At a certain stage in life, harshness, toughness towards another is counterproductive. Not only unproductive, but counterproductive. Unfortunately, Moses made this mistake. How did he make the mistake? Because people, they were saying, what brought us to die in the desert. Unfortunately, the manner of speaking of some of the Israelites at the time was not proper. And they kind of, brought these a lot of difficulties upon themselves as a result. And therefore, we should always think before we speak. We should think about what it is what the message is that we want to get across, and then use the appropriate language to explain it. Had they simply gone to Moses and said, "What should we do? There's no water. What do you suggest?" or something like that, it would have been a whole different ballgame. But unfortunately, when people are frustrated, you know how it goes. When you're tired and you're frustrated, you lash out. And that's what happened. And Moses too was tired and frustrated. He also lashed out. He was almost 120 years old at this point in time. And I think he'd kind of had enough, hadn't he, of their attitude and so on. Of their approach to things. So anyway, instead of speaking to this rock, because speaking would have brought out the same qualities that he wanted to bring out, the qualities of water, of fresh water, of life-giving water. Water is always a symbol of life. That life-giving water would have gushed out had he spoken to them in the right way. But he didn't. And to a certain extent, we're still suffering as a result of that. I went to last Friday night, a friend of mine, a student of mine actually, invited me to the continued wedding celebration of his son. his son and his new daughter-in-law. Now, the way it's done is as follows: when there's a wedding, so there's the wedding canopy and so on and so forth, and the day of the wedding, and that's obviously a very joyous time and joyous celebration. But the custom, the requirement is actually to celebrate for 7 days, right? Where you make formal meals and people come and you invite them, and singing and dancing and sometimes speeches and so on. Anyway, so he invited me. I went, and I have a very good doctor friend who is also a very, very, very learned person. He was asked to speak as well, and he said like this: he said, marriage is a 3-ring circus. So, I know that he's a joker sometimes, but marriage is a 3-ring circus. And then he explained, there's the engagement ring, then there's the wedding ring, and then there's the suffering. Okay, so that was his joke for the evening. Let's not talk about the suffering part of things. We want to bring out not the suffering that we're going through, but the potential that's there that can be brought out by talking. In other words, when, for instance, with our children, when children are very young, you have to give them orders, right? They don't behave themselves. Usually the solution is what's called a patch. You smack him on the rear end, not too hard, obviously, just enough to make him realize, him or her, realize that you mean business, if they don't listen the first time. Now, there's some parents, I have to be honest, there are some parents that never have to raise their voices. They never have to raise their hands. And those parents are definitely blessed. I'm not advocating beating children, of course not, but a little, it's called a patch in Yiddish, a little pat on the behind sometimes works wonders. Okay, so that is the tzur approach to things. That's the tzur approach to things. Right, Shelley, I'm sure a good parent generally agrees, because parents who spoil their children and never discipline them are not doing them any favors. Discipline is a very important part of growing up, knowing that there's an order, there's authority, there's a hierarchy to a certain extent in a family. In other words, parents are not children, and they're not your equals. They are your parents, and they have to be respected and hopefully revered if the parents are doing a good job. But you have to give them boundaries. That's the right way of saying it. Exactly. You give the children boundaries. The wayward child, as mentioned in the Torah, is comes about as a result of the parents not disciplining him at the right time when it was easy to discipline when he was younger. Now, discipline doesn't have to be punishments. It doesn't have to be harsh, but it has to be firm. Boundaries have to be, the way Shelley said it was perfect, right? You have to give children boundaries. Children without boundaries are lost. Children without boundaries are insecure. Boundaries, of course, reasonable boundaries that are there to protect the child and to give them a sense of authority and a sense of what is appropriate or what's inappropriate. Those kind of boundaries give a child a sense of security. Without boundaries, a child is insecure and he's always testing the boundaries to see where they will end. Like what are my parents or what are my teachers or what are my colleagues my friends going to accept from me? In any event, children require structure. That's another way of putting it. Exactly. Children require structure. And that is definitely true. And Moses knew this. And so he did the proper thing when they were young. The problem is that now they were already on the verge of entering into the land. And it was a new generation. All of the generation just about had already passed away. They died off. The generation that left Egypt. This was a new generation. It was a generation that weren't necessarily older in the sense of, being in their 80s, 90s or whatever, right? They weren't that old. They've been in the desert for 40 years. Some of them were born in the desert. Some of them were very little children when they came out of Egypt. But now they were in the, young adults and middle age and middle age perhaps. And Moshe should have spoken to them differently. He should have spoken to them. With Dibartem el, God says, speak to the rock. Don't hit the rock. So why was he told to take the staff with him? He was told to take the staff with him. This is why he made a mistake, because he spoke to one of the rocks and nothing happened. He spoke to the wrong rock, apparently. But when seeing that nothing happened, he then hit the rock with the staff. Why was he told to take the staff, not to use it to hit the rock? Because the staff was the staff of Jacob. Jacob was the primary educator of of the coming generation. Not the primary, the paradigm of an educator of the coming generation. What did he do? Did he rebuke his children? Never. Of course he rebuked them. But nevertheless, he brought out the best in them most of the time. Yes, they went through some difficulties with Joseph and so on and so forth. Let's not get into that. That was a terrible miscalculation. And they thought that Joseph was the spoiled child to a certain extent. All right, let's not whether the new generation. Yes, they were the new generation. This was the new generation. According to the commentaries and according to the text, this was actually the new generation. Most of the old generation, or the vast majority of them, had already died out, including Miriam just passed away, and Aaron is about to pass away in the next in the next few verses. Aaron's going to pass away as well, and then Moses passed away as well. But anyway, this is the next generation, and the generation that had grown up together with Moses. They'd grown up from little babies. They'd grown up with Moses, with Moshe, and with Miriam, with Aaron, and so on. They were of a different mindset. They did not have this mindset of the victim mentality. They had the mindset of the march forward mentality. Yeah, it sometimes got them into trouble, like there were those that tried to get to the land of Israel after God said no, because you have to wander around the desert now for 40 years because of the spies and so on and so forth. But nevertheless, the idea of the spies was also exactly that. They were the old generation, right? The new generation that was going to be led by Joshua were people who will go get it. We're going to go and get it, and we're going to make this work. They were solution oriented, if you want to put it that way. They were very focused on getting things done, on getting the solutions. Moses, therefore, took them back a step when he treated them as if they were atzur, as if they were the former kind of rock, the rock where everything was hidden. These were not people who were of that mindset. They were a completely different mindset. They were the mindset of, we'll do what you tell us to do, let us move forward. Now, who are the people that are complaining about water? Well, maybe that was some of the remnants of the old generation, or the mixed multitude and so on. They were not as knowledgeable as their parents. No, it's true, they were not as knowledgeable as their parents, but they were willing to learn. They were willing to learn, and they were willing to do what was necessary to move things forward towards the Holy Land. And that was Moses' mistake. He treated them as if they were still the previous generation. So what do we get out of this? What we get out of this essentially is we have to know where we're holding with the people that are around us. Are the people sort of old generation people, old mindset, victim mentality, people where all their powers, their abilities and talents and so on are hidden and they have to be brought out mostly by force? Or are they people that you can speak to, members of your family, let's say, that you can speak to and bring the best out in them through words? As we know from the, and I've repeated it many times, probably ad nauseum already, but I've repeated it many times, the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov on, I shouldn't say ad nauseum, that can never get ad nauseum, but the Baal Shem Tov on the words, Tzora ta'aseh l'teva. Noah is told by God, make a window for the ark. Make a window or a source of light. There's two explanations. Make a window or a source of light for the ark. The word for ark, teva, means word. Make a window for your words. In other words, make your words filled with light. Fill your words with light. Let your words be a window to the light coming in, or let them be themselves a source of light. And if one is speaking to a person who is open to that, that's the way to talk to them, not to talk to them with threats and punishments and so on and so forth. We have to keep this in mind for our own children. If one can speak to one's children in now, obviously, if one's been approaching things in the former mode, in the mode of harshness and punishments and so on and so forth, it's going to take quite a while for them to change their mindset, but it can be done. We have to know what we owe, what we are owing to the people around us. That's true. Do they have to be spoken with force? If necessary, only if necessary. In other words, let's put it this way. A person's focus could be on what the other person is doing wrong. And then there's two approaches, the harsh approach or just the harsh word approach. Neither of them are necessarily beneficial. It's much better to set up for the person that you're trying to convince. It's much better to set up an image of him or her that they can attempt to live up to. Now, we're not saying that, you have to now approach your child, you're the perfect child and you have to live up to it. No, but practically speaking, show them that they can be more than they are. Give them the sense that you trust them to find a way to be more than they are, not that you tell them what to do. You show them the goal and let them reach it by themselves. Let them figure out a way to do it. Let them figure out the way. Moses didn't have to tell Joshua how to conquer the land. Joshua figured it out for himself. He didn't need to be told. So, similarly with our kids, if we set up for them the goal, but let them achieve it in the way that they understand best, you'll find that things work out much more as a partnership rather than as a top-down. And the top-down approach generally these days does not work. It has to be an equal partnership approach with older children. I mean, children in their 20s. They're not that old, but children in their 20s, 30s. But it has to be, obviously, you have to know the child that we're speaking about. Some kids at that age are very immature, and especially if they're taking drugs and things like that. It's it could be very hard to speak to them in a rational kind of a way. But punishing is not necessarily going to work either. So you have to figure it out. It's one of the other hats I wear is actually what would you call it, an advisor or a I wouldn't say a therapist because I'm not a qualified therapist, but helping people with therapy issues. Let's put it that way. Okay, so to speak to them with words, yeah. Window, source of light for the ark, yeah, that's correct. Let your words be the window to the source of light. Source of light. Talk nicely to your children in a mature way, right? Selah, the spelling of Selah this is the spelling of Selah in Hebrew. That's how you spell Selah. And in English, it would be like that, Selah. So you're asking what's the difference again between the two? The difference between the two is that the tzur is where, in order to get the light out from inside, it needs harsh action. It needs, they need to be hit on the head kind of thing. Whereas the Selah, it's all at the surface and all you have to do is speak to it and it comes out. what you have to say. Yes, well, one has to learn what to say. You have to, you have to learn the right words, the right mode of speaking. You can't call someone a dipstick or whatever and expect him to be listening to you. But if you can make the image for them, a practical image of where they can be next or beyond that, and let them find a way to live up to that, then then you're in the game, so to speak. Okay, let's have generation Moshe all scheduled to die, including Moshe. Rabbi, isn't it written that each generation after their parents were not as believing as their parents because they were further removed from the light? Maybe, but it depends on how you're looking at things. You see, if you're looking at things from the point of view of top down, then you're right. But that is not necessarily the case. That is not necessarily the case. The Rebbe did not look at it. The Lubavitcher Rebbe did not look at it like that. He looked at it from bottom up. In other words, we're progressing. Yes, it's true that we've lost a lot of, a lot of wisdom and a lot of whatever it is over the generations. But nevertheless, we are capable of doing what needs to be done. And things are going in an upward spiral rather than a downward spiral. The further away we get from Matan Torah, from when the Torah was given, that's one way of looking at it. We're further and further away, and therefore we have less and less of what was given at the Torah. And the other way of looking at it is we're getting closer and closer to the Messianic era, and therefore you have to look forward and not backwards, and use what you have. Yes, trying to increase what you have, obviously, but use what you have to move forward rather than look back and think, oh, we're so weak and useless and unspiritual and insensitive and so on and so forth. It's not going to help anybody. High five, Rabbi. Yeah, thank you. Okay, why do some of the sounds end with Selah? That's actually spelled differently. That's spelled differently. Selah means, it's a word which means forever, but that's spelled like this in Hebrew. Selah. It's spelled with a hey at the end. It's a different word. That word means forever. Okay, let's see now. The khabar approach works with this generation. Yes, I think it does. You can see there's youngsters going out. I have a young friend, actually more than one young friend. One is going in the next few weeks to Italy to start a new synagogue in an Italian city. I think he's going to Rome. It might be Milan, I'm not sure. I have another young friend who is going to Russia to start up a new community in Russia, believe it or not. There's another fellow who is, because of COVID, he can't go back yet, but he just went, before COVID, he went to New Zealand and he was back visiting his parents, and he's now the chief rabbi of New Zealand. He, in fact, prays together in the same shul as me, davens in the same shul, in the same synagogue. Okay. So the young generation is doing what needs to be done. They're doing it. So Justin asks, you explain why Moshe does not find favor in God's eyes with his actions and water to sell. I just wanted to point out that later in Parsha, Pinchas, yeah, it's going to quote, God directly speaking to Moses, says Moses failed to sanctify God, didn't sanctify God with the water. That is why God was angry. Moses did not find favor in his eyes. Like you said, the Gvura of Tsur was not what the Israelites needed then. Actually, God commanded Moses the opposite. He told him to speak to the rock. Exactly. Moses acted on the Selah instead of the Meriva. Right. Okay. To Moses' credit, though, in any other previous Meriva, God definitely went for harshness. Yeah, it's true to a certain extent. Yeah. But this was at the end of the 40 years. They were old enough now. God commanded Moses to sanctify his name in the water, like you said. He should have spoken to the Israelites differently. He did not. Yeah, that's the deal. So it would seem that the rituals, yeah, you're right, I agree with that. It would seem that the rituals were to get us through the dark ages, understanding the higher meaning returns us to the wisdom of those who protected it by making a ritual out of it. I'm not sure that I understand that. Let me read that again. It would seem that the rituals were to get us through the dark ages, and understanding the higher meaning returns us to the wisdom of those who protected it by making a ritual out of it. That's interesting. I'm not sure which rituals you're talking about. If you're talking about certain Jewish rituals, I don't agree with that. Those are just as valid as they always were, because the rituals are actually channels by which to access the light, essentially. So I'm not sure that's what you were talking about, but if yeah, then we disagree. We agree to disagree. Right. Look at the first generation who came out of Europe versus those born in America. Each generation seems to be less believing. I don't know. Yes, you could certainly look at it like that. Each generation does seem to be less believing. However, it's not always what your eyes tell you, because they're not believing in the same way that you do, or in the same way that I do, perhaps. But give a youngster a challenge, give him a challenge and a goal, and you will see that they perform way beyond your expectations. Way beyond your expectations. These are guys that are, willing to, guys and girls who are capable of startling us all with their dedication and their insight and, frankly, their wisdom. I think wisdom builds up over the years. I think wisdom is, yes, it's not something that a person can inherit. You don't inherit wisdom from anybody else, but there is something, nevertheless, in the air. There's a certain amount of wisdom in the air that does get absorbed if a person is willing to absorb it, and that wisdom then gets built upon rather than rebuilt. Gets built upon. Yes, it depends on one's education, it depends on one's abilities and so on. But look, if you think about it, some of the greatest sages in the Torah, especially in the oral Torah, were people who were ignoramuses. Rabbi Akiva, the famous Rabbi Akiva, until the age of 40 was an ignoramus. He became the greatest scholar, one of the greatest scholars in Jewish history. Look at someone like Ruth, who she was a Moabite, and she converted to Judaism, and there was a whole book that was written as a book of the canon of scripture that was written in her honor. She was the one that brought that whole thing about, and there are many other examples. Shmai and Avtalion, two very, very great sages who were the teachers of Hillel and Shammai. They were Gerim. They were the sons of one of the Roman generals. I forget what it was. I forget who he was. And they figured out that Rome is not the way to go. They both converted, these two sons, and they became the greatest sages of their generation. The 10 hidden sfirot, yeah, that would be, the hidden sfirot would be called the genuzot. Yeah, I'll write it for you. Hidden sfirot, genuzot. It was one of the Caesars, yeah. But which one? It wasn't Julius. It was before Julius Caesar. One of the, I forget. I can find out if anyone's interested. Open for me like an eye of a needle. That phrase, open for me like an eye of a needle. What's the Hebrew for hidden? If you want it in Hebrew, I'll type it in Hebrew. Gnuzot. Gnuzot, like that. And what is the, here it says like this. I'll write this in Hebrew also. Pitchu li chuda shel machat. אני אפתח לכם shel ulam. There you go. Open for me like an eye of a needle, and I will open for you like the opening of the temple, which actually had no doors. That opening of the yeah. All right. Yeah, let me just go back to some of the questions here. Looking at the first generation who came out of Europe, first those in America, each generation seems to be less believing. Yeah, it does. It does seem that way, and it may be true. It may be true in a general sense, but give people the right challenge, and you'd be surprised. You'd be amazed at what they can accomplish. I would argue, says Aiden, I would argue that at least in my family, because my family immigrated to the US, had to assimilate the belief that kept that believing quiet, and I had to seek my own teaching that was not given them. Yeah, that happened, unfortunately. You have to work for it. I agree. Where is, you're asking them the what's it, the billion dollar question? Where is Mashiach? Where is the Messiah? Where is that's a question I can't really answer. If I knew, I would tell you, but I don't. Nobody knows that, and I think the reason is that, to a certain extent, you could say that Mashiach is the sort of the collective soul. To be more precise, the collective Yechida Shebenefesh, the highest level of soul of the entire people. And when they're in touch, when people are more in touch with their innermost soul, then I think it'll be manifested automatically. That's what I think. You think our global vessel isn't ready? Well, I would, on the surface of it, you probably, you may be right. But I would not express that. I wouldn't want to express it. I wouldn't say we are not ready. I would say we're almost ready, or we are preparing, or we're on the way, or something like that. In other words, instead of looking at the negative side of things, let's look at the, we may have a little bit to go. We may even have a lot to go, who knows? But we can work on it, and we can do our part. That's the way to look at it, and that's the way to do it. So that's the deal, in my opinion. I read a good joke somebody sent to me about a politician. A politician is someone who looks for problems, and when he doesn't find them, manufactures them, then proposes solutions that are completely wrong, and fails to solve them. Something, how did it go? I forget how it went exactly. Something like that. But that, unfortunately, is true of many. Let me just see here. I'll just, I had it a moment ago. Let's see here. Okay. Oop. I have jokes here from Groucho Marx. He said like this, politics is the art of looking for trouble, finding it everywhere, diagnosing it incorrectly, and applying the wrong remedies. There you go. And to Yael, to say something for you, because you told us about your dog Rafi. So Groucho Marx says as follows: outside of a dog, a book is a man's best friend. Inside of a dog, it's too dark to read. Okay, folks, I think we've come to the end. All right. Good night, everybody. I'll put the video up. I hope you have the. I'll just drop the subscription information once more, if you wouldn't mind, just in case everyone wants to do it. All right, you're all welcome, everybody, and I will hope to see you next week. All right. All the best then. All right, good night.